Iskala ma'am,
Yes. Yes, Richard. Karthik.
మీ
Karthik.
అన్మ్యూట్ మ్యూట్ చేయండి అంటున్నా.
Sir, Vijay Bhaskar Reddy, sir. Can we start the session, sir?
We'll start.
Because 56 participants are joined, no? They will join. Meanwhile. Yes. Karthik,
Ma'am,
yes, let us start now the session.
yes, ma'am, we'll start.
You take Joel sir. Already is there, no?
You all are
Okay.
in panel only, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, Suman sir.
Yes, Karthik.
Yeah,
Yes,
shall we start the session, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
yes,
Shashkala, ma'am.
yes. Thank you, Karthik.
Yeah,
Good afternoon, all dear participants. And now we are in the uh, fifth day after post lunch session. Now we have speaker Mr. Y. Joel Suman. I think he needs no introduction because he is well known to you. Already he gave one lecture. Now again he is going to give some more information regarding the principles and practices of water conservation. Mm, so I welcome you, sir,
Thank you,
for
ma'am.
this session. Thank you very much. You can start the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, all of you. Welcome to this program and to this session as well. So, in Hyderabad today, we are having a beautiful weather, and aptly it is. I think it's a good time for us to talk about water and what are the conservation principles and practices. I will be sharing my screen with you. Uh,
yes.
right. Karthik, is my screen visible?
No, not visible. Please
Okay,
share it. Now it is visible.
visible now?
Yeah, fine.
Right, right. So we're going to talk about the water conservation and what are the principles and practices of water conservation. So to begin with, today we're going to talk about what is water conservation, why do we need to conserve water, what are the strategies in the nature, what are the natural strategies for water conservation, then what are the principles of water conservation, what is the policy in India for what are the different policies in India on water conservation. Then we'll discuss also about the practices. So at community level, what are the practices? At industrial level, what are the practices? At household and at a personal level, what can I do to conserve water? So to begin with, what is water conservation? So water conservation, as we have discussed in the previous session, is a very crucial component of the National Water Policy 2012. So if you look at the definition of water conservation, it says it is includes all policies, strategies, and activities to sustainably manage natural resources of fresh water, to, to protect the hydrosphere, and to meet the current and future demands of human beings. So here I want to emphasize on a couple of points. So one is the purpose is to meet the needs of current and future human beings. So we are not just responsible for our own the demand of water, but also for the future. And also any activity we do to make sure that there is availability of fresh water is what is water conservation. So what does that mean? So to look at it, why do we need to first we'll think why do we need to conserve water? So we need to conserve water because firstly, like we have discussed it in the previous session also, water is a finite and scarce resource. It is finite. There is a fixed amount of water on our planet. There can be neither more than it, neither less than it. So that is something, because often the industrial and even at a personal level, our practices is that we behave in a way that water is an infinite resource. So but water is a finite resource and it is very scarce. To put it in perspective, what there is less than 1% of water on our planet is fit for consumption, is available for consumption, right? Then water is not available everywhere at all the time. So right now, because of several years of policy development and development of our communities, we have at least drinking water available whenever we want. We can open a tap and get water. But in the natural system, water is dynamic. It is dynamic in space and time, which means that water is not available everywhere at all the time. So we call that as a hydrological cycle. Depending on the season, depending on the weather, depending on the location, water availability changes. And these two aspects of water, these two properties of water, it is not limited to are humans only. These are challenges faced by all living beings on the planet. We are not the only ones who are facing this challenge. So we will see. So how do animals cope with this problem of water being dynamic in space and time, and water being a scarce and finite resource? So if we look how see how animals adapt to this inherent nature of water is they migrate. Animals move from one place to another. They move from where water is there during a certain time of the year, and when water is not there, they move to another place where water is. And land animals move, birds migrate from seasons to season in search of water. Not just land animals and birds, but even fish migrate from one place to another. And it's just not animals that migrate, even human beings migrate from one place to another. If you see, the whole human civilization was built on the quest for clean drinking water. This is how people have migrated over century millennia across the continents in search of clean drinking water. And it's not just in past history that humans have migrated. There are migrations going on even today. So if you see the case of Bangladesh, where huge lakhs and lakhs of people are migrating from the Ganges plains, from the Ganges Delta in Bangladesh because of flooding. And we need not go so far as Bangladesh. Even in Mehbubnagar the district, Palamuru villages and all, you have people migrating because of drought. One is a case where you have excess water, and one is a case where you have very scarce water. So you have a problem of flooding, you have a problem of drought. Then what is the other strategy in environment or in the nature to adapt to water? Is the second strategy of man is by managing water flows. What do you mean by managing water flows? So we use the land scape and the available land resources to manage water flows, to bring water to where we are, or to make sure there is water available. So we call them dams and reservoirs. So we build a lot of dams, reservoirs, canals to make sure that water is available where we are, and water is available when we are. And humans are not the pioneers of this innovation of managing water flows. So I want to show you a short video. It's about 2 minutes. So this is how the first dams were built on our planet. Let me just second. Yes.
Beavers are vegetarians. They gnaw through bark to eat the sugary layer underneath. They've been gnawing through forests for 20 million years. Felling trees with your teeth takes great strength, skill, and patience. One technique is to slice halfway through and let the wind do the rest. The beaver's incisors are strengthened with iron, which makes them orange. They grow continuously and even self-sharpen. The pond makes it easier to move around the heavy logs they need to build their dams. Out of the water, it's a struggle. Stones help weigh down the base. The whole family works together, carefully interlocking the timber. They dredge mud from the pond bottom to seal the dam. Each pond traps several inches of sediment every year, so there's plenty of it. The young act as apprentice builders, learning the tricks of the trade. The final results are impressive. In the Rocky Mountains, beaver dams slowly filter billions of tons of water. The ponds build up soil and nutrients and help prevent floods and droughts.
So, like you have just seen, we are not the pioneers of civil engineering in building dams and reservoirs. We have learned it from the nature, and I wanted to stress on this point so that we do not stop driving our wisdom, gaining wisdom from environment and our nature. So, what are the basic principles of water conservation? So if you look at water conservation, so a couple of principles we have seen in during my last presentation. The first thing is budgeting. So when we say budgeting, it is to understand water availability and demand. So how much water we have and what is the demand for it. Next is auditing, assessing how we use the water. Then the third principle is protect. Protection of quality and quantity of existing water source, making sure that our existing water sources and do not deplete in quantity, and the quality of water, what we call as water pollution, the quality of water is maintained for consumption. And I want to emphasize this point again, that when we say quality of water, it is not just for human beings, but it is for the ecosystem. It is for everyone around, not everyone as in not all human beings, but the ecological needs also, for the plants, for the animals, for the birds, for the fish, and for all the beings. The quality and quantity of water should be available. The next principle of water conservation is to manage. Manage is equitable distribution of water resources. No one should, no living species or creature should be deprived of water, of good quality water. It is it is a crime. I would shy from using the word crime. It is a crime to deprive anyone of this natural resource. Then next principle is efficiency. So we need to regularly maintain our storage structures. So our storage structures can be ranging from our overhead tanks and our underground sumps, to our lakes, to our reservoirs, to our dams, to our rivers. They need some sort of maintenance. So then maintenance and efficiency of our supply systems, fixing leakages. Last time in my last presentation, we were talking about how in the audit process we identify what are the leakages and how to fix them. And in efficiency, we update our fixtures to make sure they can, so that we can optimize our water usage. The next principle is awareness, sensitization on the scarcity and quality of water. There is a need to make sure that water is available in good quality for everyone. So this everyone should be aware of. So that is awareness. And the last intervention and last principle we can think about is technology. What are the technologies to store water? What are the technologies we need to recharge our existing structures after we have consumed? How do we replenish water? So these are the things. So one example of this we often keep hearing is rainwater harvesting or rainwater harvesting structures. So we will discuss more in depth about them. So these are the basic principles of water conservation. So firstly, we look into what are the policies in water, policies of water in India. So if you look into the policy at the policy level, the first thing is our responsibility. It is a constitutional responsibility as per the Indian Constitution, Article 51A, point G of the Indian Constitution, to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for all living creatures. So we cannot deprive any of them of their fundamental right to these natural resources. The second policy is our Water Act, Water Act of 1974. So one of the main takeaway points in that is to maintain or restore the wholesomeness of water. When you say wholesomeness of water, what we mean is that water in a quantitative sense, there has to be wholesomeness. That means water should be available in quantity and in quality. There are inherent properties in water. The natural properties of water should also be maintained. It is designed to assess pollution levels and punish polluters. So this is the Water Act of 1974. Then we have the National Water Policy, which was first adopted in 1987 and it was updated in 2012. So in my last session, we were talking about this National Water Policy 2012. So one of the key points in the National Water Policy of 2012 is to treat water as an economic good. So we were seeing how water is an economic good and it has a lot of economic value. The ministry claims to protect its conservation and efficient use. So ministry claims to promote its conservation. So we were discussing about the principles of promotion of conservation, and the ministry itself is promoting these principles. It also promotes the efficiency in water use. So the next, we're going to look at some of the traditional water conservation practices. So water conservation, and this is not a practice of a new age. Since the dawn of civilization, we have seen that even in nature, water is dynamic and water is scarce. So it needed some sort of intervention to make sure that water is there wherever life is or wherever the civilizations exist. So these are some of the structures. So we will see what are some of the structures and practices in our past civilizations. So this is called a jhalra, and this structure is built in the 17th century. It's located in Jodhpur, and it takes water from upstream lakes and reservoirs. So this thing is usually within the confines of a palace, and it's to ensure easy and regular supply water for religious rites, royal ceremonies, and community use. So this is a water source for our cultural needs. So, as much as water is essential for survival, water is a very integral part of our cultural system. So, there are survival needs of water, there are social needs of water, and there are economic needs of water, and there are cultural needs of water. So, as much as water is seen as an economic resource, even for cultural practices, water is very essential, and this is a structure which was primarily built for that. And if you see, want to read more about very good water management practices and water management structures, Western India is a very good place, because water has traditionally been scarce in that part of the country. So there are a lot of technologies have been developed there, a lot of management practices have been developed there, and it's a very good place to look into these practices and technologies. Next one is this is called a talab. So if you're from Hyderabad, I think you can identify this thing. This thing is it is a small water storage structure which is there inside the Golconda fort. So a talab is a small tank. It's a small tank within the confines of a fort, where you make sure that even during any times of stress like war, there is water available for the people inside the fort. Because if there's a time of war, you cannot leave the fort. So these structures are built within the fort to make sure that there is water available there. And thanks to this talab, which is there in the Golconda fort, the Nizam army was able to defend itself from Aurangzeb for nearly 2.5 years. So the army which was camped outside the fort did not know how. They thought if we surround the fort they will not have resources and they will give up. But then because of this structure, for 2.5 years they were able to cultivate, they were able to practice agriculture in the fort, and there was no scarcity of water. And this thing also it is used for drinking and consumption, daily consumption. And this is called the Bawari. And you see these kind of structures in Rajasthan. And these structures are used for consuming consumption and to recharge groundwaters. These structures are very very deep. They have step like structures, so that even when the depth increases you can walk down and collect the water. And if you can see on the top left of the image, you can see there are channels designed for water to flow in from different parts of the catchment. So this is how these are some structures which were used when there is scarcity of water. There are challenges when water is too much. This is challenge of floods. So even then, so this is called the ahar pani, and you will see these in Bihar, in South Bihar. And South Bihar, in Bihar, one of the annual features of Bihar is the Methi River floods every year. Every year, there's huge flooding that happens in the Methi River, and these structures, what they do is they take the water into these channels around the agriculture area, and so that after, when there is excess water, the water enters into these channels, and when there is less water, there is water retained in these channels for agriculture purposes. And so these are some of the structures. Now we'll look into some of the cultural practices of water management in India. So traditional water management practices. So if you see this thing, this is called a zinc, and you will see these structures in the Ladakh region in northern India. And the source of water for these zincs are from melting glaciers. But one of the, so though Ladakh region is in between mountains in the northern India, one of the major features is one of the driest places in the world. It is very dry. Water availability is very scarce. There's hardly any rainfall. And over here, what you see is you have a community of people called Chirpan. Chirpan. And the Chirpans, what they do is they assess the water, if water in these zings at the beginning of the year, and depending on the amount of water available, because at the end of the summer the glaciers will melt and then some water will be stored, will come into these zings, and depending on the water available at the end of the summer, they will plan what are the activities you can take up in the region depending on that. And this is a water management practice from North India. So if you come to South India, South India has been very famous for its water management and water management structures. So this is called a Pushkarni. Pushkarni. So this is a small tank which you can see across India. Whenever you go to temples, you'll see similar small tanks. So this is a case of and water comes in from the rivers and the catchment during monsoon season. And then there is a community of people called Nirgutti, Nirganti. Nirganti. So what the Nirganti community people do is they count the number of steps from top, and depending on the number of steps that are there, they will tell what activities can be carried out in the catchment in the region. And these people, they are the traditional water managers in this region. And next, we are going to look at some of the technology interventions at household and industrial level on water management and on water conservation. So if you see to the left, so most often when we talk about rain harvesting, firstly, there is some sort of misconception about the concept of rain harvesting. So when we talk about rain harvesting, so most of the time we think that rainwater should go into the ground, but the actual meaning of rain harvesting is consumption of rainwater, direct consumption of rainwater. It is not letting the rainwater sink into the ground, but direct consumption. And rainwater harvesting is a very old traditional practice across India and across the world. So if you see to the left, this is a traditional practice in Kerala, where what they do when in the rainy season, how do you catch water? So they just tie a sari, and then in between you have the water collecting into a container. They use it, and you will see this practice a lot in many rural areas where people are not able to travel to the reservoir or the pond or the well during the rainy season and when it's raining. So at their home, they just tie a huge cloth and the water is collected in that. And to the right, if you see the image of two huge containers and conduit coming from the roof, this is a practice in Thailand. So, and not just in Thailand, in most parts of India, and you can see a lot of these structures in northeast India also. So they have ample amount of rain, and rainfall is there for almost 200 to 250 days of a year. So they fill these structures with the rainwater which they get from rain from the rooftops into these containers, and they just consume this water. This water is stored and consumed. And let me tell you, rainwater is the cleanest form available in our natural system. Rainwater is the cleanest form, and there is absolutely very less evidence of health hazards related to consuming direct rainwater. And if you can store rainwater in a container where there is no sunlight, this rainwater can be stored for many months also. There will not be any bacteria forming in water, and there will not be any type of pathogens also. In Hyderabad itself, we have a case of one of a senior scientist who had come from Rajasthan. He consumes only rainwater. His house has no water connection. He does not have a bore water. He has a huge tank constructed under the house, and all the water that falls in his compound during the monsoon season, during different rains, goes into the tank, and he just consumes that water. And so when we talk about rainwater harvesting is direct consumption of rainwater. There are many policies in other countries on rainwater harvesting. So I want to give you an example of rainwater harvesting in Netherlands. In Netherlands, they have a policy where if you do rainwater harvesting and you use that water for your laundry. So what happens when you use rainwater for your laundry is you tend to use less amount of detergent. So the water that comes out of your laundry is less contaminated. So the government gives you almost up to 50% of subsidy to build a rainwater harvesting structure at your house, so that the government saves on water treatment, because the water coming into the sewers is less contaminated. Next, let's look into rainwater harvesting practices at an industrial level. So, in many countries, you have practices where companies use their rooftops and their campuses to capture all the rainwater and consume it directly. So one major advantage companies have when directly using rainwater is you won't have the challenge of cleaning them a lot. So usually companies, industrial processes need water that is very that is treated to a large degree. So if you are consuming rainwater for industrial processes, water need not be treated as much, and the investment on water treatment can come down drastically. In in some in Thailand, there is a water policy, rainwater harvesting policy for industries, where each company they give their water budget to the industries department annually. You submit an budget to the industries department. So what the industries department does is, based on your budget, they give you the water supply, but the amount of water they supply you will be reduced by the amount of rainwater harvesting you can do for the year. And the more amount of water you can harvest, the lesser will be your water tariff. So companies are motivated to install larger structures, and to make sure every drop of rainwater that falls into their campuses is rightly captured and utilized for their consumption. And it is an incentive for the government, because that much water supply responsibility is shifted onto the consumer. So the consumer itself themselves source the water directly from the natural systems. So to the left you can see rainwater harvesting structures overhead, over the ground rainwater harvesting structures, and to the right you can see a diagram of how you can install rainwater harvesting structures under the ground. And so this, though it seems like a huge as a investment initially, the savings on the returns on investment are very quick, because firstly companies will be saving huge amounts of money on treatment of water, and secondly water itself has become so expensive for companies to source in these days. So so the investment to the monthly expenditures, the operational expenditure to source water is greatly reduced by that. So when we are talking about technology interventions for water conservation, so this is called a rainwater harvesting structure. And the most common thing which we look at, or which we usually talk about, is a groundwater recharging pit. So where you send the water into the ground, so that is called a groundwater recharging pit. So this is a basic diagram of a groundwater recharge pit, which is suitable for houses. For small houses, this structure is very suitable, and it is suitable where the water inflows are not very high. They're low to moderate inflows. So where there is a huge rush of water, these structures are not as efficient. So usually what happens is, irrespective of the size of the institution, irrespective of what are the uh, kind of surroundings, everyone installs only this structure, and they think that okay, now we are conserving water. So that is the general perception, but there are certain limitations. And usually this structure is suitable where you have soil and shrubbery in the surroundings, because if there is a heavy downpour, or like in the cases of a sudden heavy downpour like a cloud burst or something, these structures tend to flood. Water can raise about it, because water goes into the ground in a much more slowly. So these are very low maintenance structures, and you just once a year you can clean the top layer, and once in 5 to 7 years, if you can replace the top layer of sand, that is enough. So if you see there, it is a three-layer structure. The bottom layer is pebbles, large pebbles. Then you have smaller aggregates, or you call them metal, and then you have sand. So one easy fix which we have implemented in many of our interventions, and where we have suggested, or we have engineered, we have helped install rainwater structures, is there is something called a geotextile. It's a thin membrane. It is like a plastic sheet which is pervious. So if you can just put a thin sheet on top of the sand, you need not even think about replacing the sand once in 5 to 7 years. Any sort of dust or in solid substances will get settled on top of the sheet. The sheet can be dusted. So this can improve, extend the maintenance cycles of uh, groundwater recharge pit. These are very low cost, just about 3,000 to 5,000 rupees will charge to get one recharge pit. The next one is what we call as an injection borewell. Injection borewell is works on a similar principle as a groundwater recharge pit. So the only difference in structure is, in between the middle of the groundwater recharge pit, you have a bore, and in that bore is a normal casing. So this casing has pores. So this structure is suitable for large catchments. So when you have places which are big campuses, this is a kind of structure that needs to go in places where there is a large catchment, and where you have a lot of concrete structure around, where water inflow is heavy, and the runoff is more. This structure will be very helpful. And if a campus is huge and has a lot of cemented area, and water flows in at water runoff is high, so this structure makes sure that water goes into this into the injection well quickly, so there will be no flooding. These are slightly more expensive, but then in comparison, we have seen cases where the return of investment is quick within just one season. So I will give you an example of these structures have been installed in JNTU campus in Kukatpalli, and it was a very water stressed area. But because of these structures, their dependency on water from external sources has come down a lot, and just within one summer they have seen a savings of nearly 1000 water tankers into the campus. So each water tanker in cities would cost something close to 500 rupees. So you can just see how quick the return on investment for these structures are. So excuse me. So these structures are very good to install even in farmlands, because in farmlands where people cultivate paddy and ground paddy, cotton, so these kind of crops are there. The groundwater tends to deplete very fast. So during the monsoon, whatever is the excess water in the catchment can easily be replenished into the catchment, into the aquifer. And the cost of these structures usually is about 75,000 to 120,000. And the structure, it's very basic. It doesn't need a lot of engineering work. The only difference is, and one very big advantage of these things is, this can be easily installed where bore wells have dried up. And in fact, in we have implemented these structures in some of places in Nalgonda. And one major problem, if you people know, is that there is a lot of groundwater contamination in Nalgonda because of fluorosis, and because of rapid recharging, the fluoride level in water has come down. So this is, you can recharge dried up bore wells quickly using these structures. So these are some of the technology interventions we can implement at at a household level, at an institution level, at a industrial level, at a residential level, to conserve water. So what can we do at a personal level, at our personal capacity? What can we do at so one thing is, make sure firstly at your individual campuses or compounds you have a rainwater structure. And if you are doing any gardening, it is always advised to do gardening either early in the morning or late in the evening, to make sure water doesn't evaporate quickly. Then flush less, don't not flush. But there are newer and more advanced fixtures for flushing, and bathroom fixtures which use water more efficiently. And rainwater harvesting we had just discussed. And this is a policy which is there in India. Almost all municipal corporations have this policy that for a structure which is above 100 square yards, there has to be a rainwater harvesting structure. And we have seen what happens when this doesn't happen. Last year we have seen the case in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai city, where during summer the city almost ran out of water. There was no water available. Offices had to close down. They had to tell, restaurants had signboards which said, which told people, we will be supplying only one glass of water, don't ask for extra water. And people found it very stressful to get water. And a place like a municipality like Chennai, or even in Hyderabad, we have municipal norms that every building should have a rainwater harvesting structure. But sadly, the challenge is in implementation. So there is no monitoring mechanism to make sure that uh, every household or every building has a rainwater harvesting structure. So we've seen what has happened. It's not that we do not have the rules, we don't have the policies, we have. But people need to implement these policies and spot and fix leakages at your individual capacity, at your homes, in your schools, in your campuses. If you find a leaking structure, please make it your responsibility. You are undergoing a course on green audit, so you can be more responsible and take personal action to make sure that our scarce and finite resources are not wasted. Choose efficient fixtures and don't use your washing machine unless there is a full load. So this can save almost up to 40 to 40% of the water we use in our laundry itself. So these are some of the activities we can do at our household level. And uh, and the most important thing is to make sure that we see this as our own problem, and as long as we think that water conservation it is someone else's responsibility, this problem will never ever be addressed in our societies. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So if you have any questions, I will take up this topic. I think we have about 10 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. I hope participants and everyone follow some of the things at least. Sir, is it audible?
Yes, I can hear. I can hear. Just a second. I will.
Stop the screen sharing, sir.
Yeah, I'll have to stop screen sharing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Joel. You have given very good insight to this topic. You have given different ways, different technology interventions, how best we can conserve water. And now let us go for the question and answer.
If anyone is having, please raise your hand and I can take the questions.
Two raised, it seems.
Yeah, ma'am. Yes. Yeah, Rakesh sir, you can talk. Unmute your mic and you can ask the question. Sonmane sir, you can unmute your mic and you can. If anyone is having doubts, please raise your hand and we can take into panel, or you can ask the question or post in the question and answer session or else in chat box. Yeah, there is a one question.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, sir. Yeah, tell me, sir.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, sir. Thank you for your various techniques towards water conservation, sir. Joel, sir. Sir, actually, in field bore wells, what kind of structures could save the water in underground level? Because nowadays, the underground water table is going down. I mean, whatever you have shown, like water injection wells, will it work effectively for field bore wells?
Absolutely. Is it Mr. Your name is Mr. Reddy, right?
Rakesh, sir. No.
Rakesh.
Reddy. Yes,
Hi,
Rakesh Reddy.
Hi, Rakesh.
Nice.
This
Hello.
is
Hello, sir.
very so. Groundwater depletion is a very major concern in rural areas, especially in the agriculture sector. And this, I have worked in some of the agriculture projects, and we have implemented groundwater recharge structures for agriculture purposes only. And we have used injection borewell systems to replenish groundwater uh, in fields, in agriculture lands. it has been it's very effective. So usually, I mean, I was just telling you during my session what happens in when farmers go for borewell digging is they do not do a land survey.
Okay.
Okay, that is one of the major challenges. And in invariably everyone goes for at least 2 or 3 bore wells. And if
Yes.
you go into villages right now, we have done studies in Jangam, in Yadadri, and in Mehboob Nagar. You there are now almost 50 to 60% bore wells are dry. So this structure can be easily implemented at a dried bore well, because you already have a shaft, casing is there, you just need to remove the casing, make some holes in the casing, put it back, and around the existing bore well dig around to 6 feet, and for up to 4 feet you can have big stones, a large marble, large metal, and then at around 3.5 4 feet you can have for 2 feet of small metal, and over just for 1.5 2 feet you can have sand. On top of it, cover it with a geotextile sheet so that lot of mud doesn't go into the structure. And these things can be used to recharge groundwater in fields. We have done it, and the results have been very good. Within one season we have seen borewells working. So
Working
yes,
back.
it is
Okay.
a very practical solution.
Sir, what should be the dia of the uh, recharge pit, sir, around the well?
The diameter,
You
I
told me
mean,
that
the
6 feet is the
pit,
depth.
yeah, 6 feet is we usually go for
Depth.
2 meters by 2 meters structure.
Okay, sir. 2
Yeah,
meters
one
by
more
2
question.
meters. Okay,
Yes,
sir.
two
Okay,
meters
sir.
by
Thank
two
you, sir.
meters.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the
Thank you.
information.
And Mr. Rakesh Reddy, and if you are are thinking of implementing, I would suggest you approach your nearest KVK ones, Krishi Vignan Kendra in your region, because Krishi Vignan Kendra gives guidance on how to scientifically apply these structures.
Yes, sir. There is a question. How to differentiate moderate and low rainwater and heavy specific rate or parameter? Sir, could you please explain?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, how to differentiate moderate, low rainwater and heavy specific rate or parameter? Sir, could you please explain?
Okay, so when I say moderate or low, so usually if it's a small house, okay, if it's a small house, let's say about 250 to uh, anywhere ranging from 150 to 300 square yards, the amount of water that comes into the catchment and which flows into groundwater recharge pit can be categorized as moderate as low in flow. But if you take huge campus, like for example, if you take the campus of your department, it is spread across 1 or 2 acres or more than that. So the kind of water that inflows from such a large catchment is usually is how you categorize as heavy inflows. And definitely it will also depend on the kind of rainfall, but that is something which is not cannot be considered, or cannot be factored in, because it is even the a heavy rainfall is a heavy rainfall irrespective in a small campus or large campus. So that is why for a small kind of a ground the water recharge pit, it is usually good that in the surroundings there is soil or shrubbery, so that the water can does not flood and stay over there causing some sort of inconvenience. The water can percolate in the surrounding also.
Yeah, sir. One more question.
Yes,
What are the advantages and disadvantages of water conservation?
as of now, I do not see any disadvantages other than a minor initial investment. Okay, so if you want to do some kind of a technology investment, Water conservation disadvantages, I do not see any, or not that I can think are very significant. At least the disadvantages are something which are not very significant. But definitely we are having a water crisis, and a water crisis is being amplified even more because of climate change. The communities are the cost of water is increasing. The And because of the cost of water and the availability of water, it is affecting our socio-economic statuses. People are having to migrate to different places now. When we talk of there, nearly almost 70 to 80% of the migrations that are right now taking place across the world can be rooted to water scarcity or flooding. So this is a huge global crisis, and water conservation is at a community level, and water management. So that's why I was during my presentation I was just talking about water conservation practices even when there is more rain, excess rain. So I was just showing you of how household level people in Kerala consume rainwater. Kerala is a place where you have ample rainfall. The reservoirs are full. But still, traditionally, there have been practices there, not just for places where water is scarce, but even where water is in surplus.
Yeah, one more question, sir.
Yes, please.
So it's extended to the before question actually.
Okay.
So can you please repeat the Kendra for what harvesting pit is and which we could refer to the name?
So, if you guys need some kind of guidance, I will be definitely able to help you out. And but at villages, you can visit Krishi Vignan Kendra. Krishi Vignan Kendras are there in all every district headquarters. In Telangana right now, at least the 33 districts, I don't think have KVKs, but the older 10 districts, all the 10 districts, they have a KVK. If you go to the headquarters, you can approach to the KVK and ask them to give guidance at a field level on how to install a rainwater groundwater recharge structure. So they will so all the staff so there are hydrologists in KVKs. They can help you if you want to implement in the rural areas. If it is in Hyderabad, definitely you can approach PGTSAU, Professor Jaishankar Agriculture University, and you can approach the Water Resources Department in JNTU. And I'm sure in Usman University, the Water Resources Department can also give you guidance on these kind of structures. The biggest challenge is people don't ask. If you can approach these institutions, they are always ready to help you. So we think who will be able to help us. So there are these knowledge hubs, there are expertise over there. They will definitely come forward and help you. Or in villages, your RWS department can also, rural water supply department can also help you out. In Hyderabad Metro Water Supply and Sewage have given guidelines. They have specific guidelines on installing groundwater recharge structures in the city.
Yes, sir. There is a question. Which is the cheapest technical support system for household water outlet? Is rainwater harvesting compulsory for residential site or any area defined in Act?
So in the cities, definitely, firstly, the cheapest is a groundwater recharge pit. It will not cost you more than 3,000 rupees. It is, and I am sure, at least I have experienced it myself personally, and I can tell you from my experience that the borewells in my neighborhood have dried up, but then my borewell hasn't dried up at least in the past 10 years, and this I can say is largely because of rainwater recharge pit. So the cost of going for reboring will be much higher than the cost of installing a rainwater harvest pit. First. Second thing you have asked, is it mandatory? Yes. as per the GHMC guidelines, not just guidelines, norms, having a rainwater harvest structure in any kind of construction above 150 square yards is a compulsory. It is a sad thing that it has not been enforced, but yes, it is a compulsory thing. Yes.
One more, sir. How to reuse the water coming out of water purifier installed at homes?
Water purifier?
How to reuse the
Okay.
water coming out of water purifiers installed at homes?
All right, I think that is a very wonderful question, and thank you whoever has asked that question. I have missed out addressing that. So the water purifier systems are one of the biggest water wasters at a household level. They consume almost 5 liters of water to produce 1 liter of clean water. So I will tell you my experience, what I do, and based on that, you can, if you want, you can also implement that. What I do is, you have these 20-liter water cans. I make sure that all the water that comes out of the water purifier structure first goes into the can. I don't let it out in the drain, and I use that water to garden my plants, so that I am saving 20 liters of my regular bore water, or whatever water I use to garden my water my garden. So that is the first thing. And second thing, yes, there are a lot of reasons right now for not using a water purifier system. Though we are because one of the major challenges in the water purifier systems is it takes away a lot of nutrients also. Because of water, we get a lot of micronutrients like calcium, iron, and potassium, and all these micronutrients we get from water. So a lot of these water purifiers, they filter out the micronutrients, and because of these things there have been cases of hormonal imbalances, organal damages for people consuming this water. So whenever if you're using a water purifier system, please make sure you understand what is the filtration system in that. Have I answered that question?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. So next
Yes,
question.
sir. Yeah, one more question, sir.
Right.
Sir, is it safe to drink rainwater directly without any proper filtration?
I would say yes. I would say yes, but it depends on how you capture the rainwater, because so there is not much history or scientific evidence saying that rainwater direct consumption of rainwater can lead to any sort of physical ailments. Firstly, the water is not contaminated, and let's say the water falls on ground, and then you on your rooftop, and through a pipeline it goes into a tank. So can you consume that water? Yes, there are evidences. There is evidence, ample evidence of people consuming such water, and there is no reported health ailments or any immediate problems like cholera or diarrhea or any such problems happening. So usually the only kind of contamination that is there in rainwater is dust particles, and our body is designed in a way to filter out any sort of dust particles. So any solid dust particles which are there, our body naturally filters it out. So no, I don't think there is any health issue. But one thing we recommend is never consume the water from a first rainfall. So usually when you have a first rainfall in the season, uh, traditionally also our households, they say, "Arey, first time rain, in the first rainfall, don't go and play in the rainfall," because they say it cleans the air. So all the dust particles and whatever contamination is there in the air, that kind of get cleaned because of the air. So other than that, there shouldn't be any problem drinking rainwater, and it's very tasty.
Yeah, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for your
you
session,
very
and
much.
your answers also good. And thank you, and very insightful.
Yes.
Yes, Shashikala ma'am.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Mr. Joel. You have given a very good lecture, and you have enlightened our participants with the right answers for their questions. Now, I'll request Dr. Amanchi Nageshwar Rao sir, Vijay Bhaskar sir to reflect on this session.
Yeah, madam, thank you so much. And
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Joel. It's a very nice and informative session. Really, water is very essential, and also it's a very important component of the water audit for any institution. How much water institution is getting, how much water we are using, and how much amount of water is going waste. These are all assessed at the institution level as part of a green audit. So you are given good information about various aspects of the water conservation and storage aspect. These are all really, it's a enlightening session. And recently I've seen one cartoon where one man is drawing water from a tube well, and animals, the leftover bodies like rivers, ponds, that left over to the animals, and those are all were filled with garbage. So man is getting a pure water from the tube well, and animals, they are not getting pure water. So this is the very tragedy thing. Many times we think ourselves, and we never bother about other animals and their thirst and other aspects. So it's what you said rightly. It's not someone else's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility to conserve the water and preserve the water or water bodies for future generations and other animals too. Really, it's a thought-provoking session and a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay Bhaskar garu. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Over
you,
to
sir.
Dr. Amanchi.
Shashikala ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And Mr. Joel Sumant, you have given very good lecture and a very inspiring
ma'am.
lecture. Thank you very much for sparing your valuable time here with our participants and for transferring your knowledge to all our participants. Thank you very much. Now,
Thank you, ma'am. And I want to congratulate all the participants for being part of such a wonderfully designed course. And this is something which I think more and more students should be actively participating to learn, because this is definitely a thing which is much needed in an academic and a professional level for our generation and the next generation. So I want to congratulate the team for putting together such a wonderful course, ma'am. Thank you.
thank you very much, Joel. Thank you for your what inspiring words also to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now let us go to our next session. Now we are going to have another eminent person, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh garu. He is Director, Observer Research Foundation. He is going to speak more about ecosystem services and ecological economics. Now, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh sir's introduction will be done by Dr. Nageshwar Rao garu. Over to Nageshwar sir.
Yeah. 1 second, madam. Yeah. Sir, good afternoon, sir. Nilanjan, sir.
Thank you. Very good afternoon.
Yeah, sir. Yeah. Welcome to the 1 week short-term course on green auditing, sir. Here, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, Director, Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata. Sir, Director for the Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, and His previous positions at various points in time include senior fellow and head of the economics at ORF, Kolkata, senior vice president and chief economist at MCX Limited in Mumbai, and a professor of econometrics at the Terry Economics at the Terry, a School of Advanced Studies in New Delhi. He had been a visiting fellow at the Linnaeus University, Sweden, and in 2008 to 2015, and has visited Uppsala University, Sweden, MIT, USA, and Stanford University, USA at various points in time. One of the leading ecological economists and developmental analyst of South Asia. He is considered as pioneer in the applications of neoclassical and heterodox economics in water governance. A natural resource economist and a econometrician by training, Dr. Ghosh obtained his PhD from the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata, and certified in water diplomacy from Harvard University, MIT, USA, and his research interests include international trade, financial markets, viewed through the lens of developmental discourse. Till recently, Dr. Ghosh advised WWF India for setting up their ecological economics practice, and he has conducted a large number of consultancy advisory assignments for organizations like IUCN, Formats, the Swedish Research Council, UNCTAD India, Chinese Consultate in Kolkata, WWF UK, World Bank, and many others. Dr. Ghosh's publications include 8 books and monographs and 50 plus peer-reviewed research articles in cherished journals like Frontiers in Environmental Science, Water Policy, Conservation and Society, Journal of Index Investing, Economic and Polity, EPW, Journal of Indian Ocean Region, Indian Journal of Agriculture and Economics, and etc., and chapters in edited volumes, and also occasional papers. And he is a regular columnist in Indian national dailies and portals like Mail Today, the Hindu Business, the Economic Times, the Third Pole, etc. So Dr. Ghosh was Vice President of Indian Society of Ecological Economics during the 2012 and 14, and delivered presidential address at this 7th biannual conference, INSEE, in December 2013. And Sarah, coming to the expertise, Sarah has a very good expertise in ecological economics, water governance, international trade, development economics and governance, and financial markets. And currently, Sarah is heading the Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, as a director. Thank you with the brief introduction, sir. And once again thank you from all the participants, because with a single mail and a small contact, we have responded. And thank you to Anurag sir of the WWF for your valuable introduction to us, sir. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure
Please,
is entirely mine.
share your PPT.
Sure.
Yes, sir. Welcome to the session, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please share your PPT, sir.
It seems that the screen sharing is disabled. Can you just enable that?
1 second, sir. Share your screen, sir.
Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Please start your slideshow, sir.
Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
So let me thank the organizers and especially Professor Rao for inviting me to this session. I was quite impressed by looking at the entire structure of the program which you sent me today morning, Professor Rao.
Yes.
In fact, the last speaker was quite appreciative of the fact that you have taken this initiative, and probably I have to echo his views only. It's great. These types of things are extremely important in order to sensitize, not only to sensitize, but also, in fact, to carry forward the mantle of understanding the very, very critical interface of environment and development. This is more so because, being an economist, all I can say is that it's essentially the developmental forces that are looming large. And these developmental forces have been impeding on the critical conservation goals that we intend to achieve. Often, I have been trained as an economist in the sense right from my undergrad days. And the one very critical thing that I was taught of when I was an undergraduate student, that what is critical is we have to look at one very, very critical figure, that is the growth of the GDP, or the gross domestic product of the nation. Now, when I completely, steamrolled the entire developmental concern to one particular number, that is GDP growth, and I am looking at it whether, okay, fine, it's 7.5% or 8%, or okay, my God, it has dropped down to 5.5%. Then in fact I am completely erasing out from my entire vision the broader concerns of inequality, the concern of poverty, and in fact what I completely erase out is the concern of the ecosystem, and the very, very important role that conservation actually plays in long-term development. So from that perspective, in fact, when I started understanding this issue, that probably the way we are looking at our economic goals is essentially what we academicians often use the term reductionist, because you are reducing the entire developmental paradigm to one number, and essentially you are completely impeding on the long-term developmental concern. More importantly, let us face it, that the poor, in fact, in and around the protected areas, they depend a lot on the environment, on the resources provided by the ecosystem, the natural resources. And that is precisely why we have lately used the term that the services provided by the ecosystem free of cost, this is more critical, free of cost to the human community, should be called ecosystem services. And these ecosystem services should more categorically, particularly large part of these ecosystem services are more categorically classified as GDP of the poor, because the poor's survival to a large extent is contingent upon these ecosystem services. The ecosystem essentially functions in its own inimitable ways. In its own inimitable ways, in the sense that it has its own processes, its own structures. If you disrupt on the structures and processes, the function somehow gets disrupted. And eventually, what gets disrupted is the provision of these goods and services that the ecosystem has been providing the human community free of cost. So that is precisely why I thought that while, in fact, you may have talked about, somebody might have talked about ecosystem services valuation, it is important to place this in the context of the broader development governance policy of the nation, as well as of the global development paradigm, which is more critically classified in the forms of what we call the sustainable development goals. So, as such, this biodiversity has been classified as the natural capital. So, if you look at economics as how essentially it evolved, you will find that apparently there were 4 factors of production that have been defined in classical economic theory: land, labor, capital, and enterprise or entrepreneurship. Now, in fact, we reclassify them in the sense we call it the 4 capitals, the 4 forms of capital, which are extremely important for essentially redelineating our survival and our developmental goals. These 4 forms of capital are physical capital in the sense the forms of infrastructure and all forms of other forms of capital. Then social capital, which essentially is consists of the social processes, social institutions, social relations. Then we have uh, natural capital. Natural capital is the capital which is provided by the biodiversity, the natural resources by themselves, which include the geology, soil, air, and all other living things. And of course, human capital, that is labor, which is a very, very critical form of capital, provided by all of us. And in fact, in some of our very recent analysis, though, in fact, you might have heard of this term ease of doing business, which the government of India has been using quite ubiquitously. And when we at ORF conducted a research and eventually came up with an important index called the Sustainable Development Goal Index, we essentially argued that all in these Sustainable Development Goals, all these 4 forms of capitals are embedded. And wherever this Sustainable Development Goal Index or Sustainable Development Goal achievement is higher, the 5th form of capital, that is financial capital, is getting drawn. That is why we stated that these 4 forms of capital put across in one basket essentially create enabling conditions for ease of doing business. So one very critical form of capital happens to be the natural capital. So it's the natural resource base, the biodiversity, that essentially creates a stock of the natural assets, which includes all forms of natural resources, geology, soil, air, water, and all other living things, the forest by itself. So the biodiversity happens to be, so one very critical thing that one needs to note here is the difference between the stock and the flow. The natural capital is essentially a stock. It's a stock of capital. And in the process, this natural capital ensures it has a particular ecosystem structure. And in the process, there is a function that the ecosystem is involved with, which apparently is a flow. And in the process, it ensures the flow of goods and services to the human community. So the stock ensures the flow. That is, the stock of natural capital essentially ensures the flow of the ecosystem services, which occurs in the form of food, which occurs in the form of medicinal plants, which occurs in the form of carbon sequestration, which occurs in the form of soil formation, which occurs in the form of various other regulating and the provisioning services. So just as the previous speaker was talking about the provision of water. So this is a very, very critical provisioning service of the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is providing that this water, yes, it's being provided from the sky. That is being provided free of cost, part of the entire hydrological cycle. So essentially what actually differentiates ecological economics from the ways economics have traditionally, or neoclassical economics to be more specific, have traditionally been conceived of. As far as neoclassical economics is concerned, it works under certain assumptions. Assumptions in the sense, first of all, there's a complete decoupling of man and nature, man and resource. So suppose, and the assumption is that if I am a seller or I am a firm, I'm supposed to do one thing. I'm supposed to maximize my profit. If I am a buyer, I am a seller, I'm supposed to do one thing. I'm supposed to maximize my utility or satisfaction subject to my budget constraints. So these, if suppose somebody turns out to be a revenue maximizer who doesn't have a farmer to whom suppose all forms of inputs might have been given for free. So he shouldn't be maximizing his profit. He should be maximizing his production. So these are the axioms under which neoclassical economics works. And here the role of nature, role of institutions, the role of the ecosystem as such are not being taken into account. So the idea is that the nature is there. It provides a stock of resource. The water is there. The water is a stock of resource to be exploited. It's the very recognition that a flow regime essentially entails the ecosystem processes, the ecosystem functions. It has its own ecosystem structure, and any form of disruption in the say in the form of constructing a large dam is simply going to vitiate that ecosystem structure, disturb that ecosystem structure, is completely forgotten in the dominion of neoclassical economics. However, when it comes to ecological economics, the idea is that the human society is embedded in the broader ecosystem. So there is a broader social ecological system that is being defined, in which there's a natural ecosystem, the human system. The natural ecosystem is also embedded in the human, the human system is also embedded in the natural ecosystem. The human system essentially exerts certain actions. It tries to extract certain benefits from the natural ecosystem. The natural ecosystem also provides those benefits to the human system in the form of the various ecosystem services. But if there is excess of exploitation of the natural ecosystem, naturally, or in the form of various economic activities, that is going to disturb the entire working of the natural ecosystem, and eventually the ecosystem services in the process, especially in the long run, are going to be affected. Suppose, say, when in the 1970s, let me talk about some of these interventions. So let's talk about one of the barrages which has been a matter of contention, essentially transboundary water conflict, contention of transboundary water conflict between Bangladesh and India. This barrage was constructed in 1975 in the state of West Bengal. It's known as in a place known as Farakka. The idea was that on the mainstream Ganga itself, the idea was that the Hooghly channel, which happens to be a distributary of the Ganga, is getting dried out, and that is why the Kolkata port is no more navigable. So the idea was resuscitation of the Kolkata port. So from the Farakka barrage was created, and eventually water was diverted through the Hooghly channel to the Kolkata port. However, that didn't help the cause of the Kolkata port to a certain extent. What happened after that? From the 1980s, 10, 15 years onwards, what was recognized is, of course, over time, that was recognized during the dry season flow within 6 years, that the dry season flow in the mainstream is declining, especially downstream of the Farakka. Now, this was not only with the dry season flow itself. There were, in fact, the Ganga by itself was supporting many other distributaries, and many of which essentially was flowing to the delta region. So the delta region started getting dry. It is not only with that. The Himalayan rivers have this characteristic of essentially bringing in sediments along with them. And these sediments essentially created the delta. So the sediments were getting deposited on the upstream of the barrage. The sediment flow also declined over time. And this happens to be a very, very soil formation, happens to be a very, very critical function, critical service of the ecosystem. This is a supporting service of the ecosystem. So the delta, or the Indian Sundarbans delta, started shrinking because of two forces. One is that the sediment flow has been declining over time. The second is that there has been sea level rise, and because the stream flow depletion also declined, the saline water has been, there is salinity ingression with saline water taking the place of the fresh water. So these two forces on two sides led to, has over time, now it's almost it's more than 40 years, 45 years of the construction of the barrage. It's been pretty well recognized that the delta has been shrinking. Large part, many of the, because it's an archipelago, the Indian Sundarbans delta, consisting of more than 100 islands. Many of the islands are also getting lost, and islands are shrinking in the process. And what has also happened is these ecosystem services and livelihoods of communities, especially the fishing community, that is also inextricably linked with each other. So the fishing community, and more importantly, what is happening is the hilsha, which happens to be a very, very critical fish species, that has also been affected, because hilsha has this characteristic of moving from the Bay of Bengal to the freshwater, and because of stream flow depletion pre-monsoon, as also in fact quite a bit of pollution, there has been substantial decline in fact in the large size in the hilsha catch, though in fact people might often talk of that there was a record hilsha catch in Bangladesh, but the fact remains that 1 kg or more than 1 kg size of Hilsa catch has actually declined. In fact, in this part, most of the school is essentially moving towards the Irrawaddy in Myanmar. So India has been importing. India was actually a net exporter of Hilsa at one point in time till 2005-6. Ever since 2008-9, India has become a net importer of Hilsa, that too by paying an extra tariff of around 35 to 40%. So one very, very critical issue is ecosystem changes brought about by unbridled human development ambitions have caused a complete change in a nation being a net exporter to a net importer. So that is precisely why I'd like to state that essentially the ecosystem and the economy are inextricably linked with each other. So until and unless you bring in the broader discourse of in ecological economics in the developmental thinking, in the developmental paradigm, we are not going to look at the uh, long-term developmental goals that we have in mind. So one very critical element is, which I talked of, is the ecosystem dependency, and I talked of this, that essentially the community in and around the region, they have a very high ecosystem dependency, especially around the protected areas. Now, I have already talked about this, that these ecosystem services are being provided free of cost. In most cases, the biggest problem is that they are devoid of markets and therefore they go unrecognized. They are not being valued. And free rider problem leads to overexploitation of the ecosystem and their services. Now, the first and foremost publication which talked about the values of the ecosystem services and how valuable the ecosystem services are to the human community was a paper by Bob Costanza and around more than 19 of his colleagues, which was published, in fact, in Nature in 1997. However, there are evidences, or rather more clear evidences of double counting out there. More importantly, it was found that the values of the ecosystem services or the services provided by ecosystem to the human community are almost 3 times of the world's GDP. So there were, between 1997 and 2005, there were a host of studies which essentially came up with various types of measures on the values of ecosystem services. But the most succinct classification of ecosystem services, on how ecosystem services should be looked at and how it is going to help us in understanding the roles that they play in the well-being of the human community, was brought about by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of 2005. And the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment essentially classified the ecosystem services into 4 broad categories. These are the provisioning services. By provisioning services, we mean all those that the ecosystems are providing us in terms of quantity. And that entails essentially production of food and water, the medicinal plants, the fuel wood, the fodder, and all other things that are being provided in terms of quantity. Then we have the various regulating services of the ecosystem, such as control of climate, disease, carbon sequestration, and so on and so forth. Then we have the cultural services of the ecosystem. By the cultural services, we essentially mean the spiritual and the recreational services, which might be, in fact, the religious services, as also tourism and other things. Now, for supporting all these 3 forms of services, what the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment did that stated was that there is some kind of an umbrella service which is provided by the ecosystem, by way of which all these 3 classifications of services are being supported. And those are called the supporting services. For example, nutrient cycles, crop pollination, soil formation. If soils are not formed, then you are neither going to have provisioning service, nor regulating service, nor the cultural services. So this essentially helped, to a certain extent, a broader understanding of the role of conservation of ecosystems in human development or economic development as such. And it's pretty well understood that the forces that emanate and vitiate the ecosystem functions or create a dent over the ecosystem functioning are the forces that are economic in nature. Suppose, say, land use change by conversion of forests to other uses, or suppose, say, the processes of urbanization and industrialization which are leading to the release of effluents in air and water, which essentially create a dent over the human well-being function. Or in fact, the changes in the ecohydrological flows in the forms of constructions of large structures. And I gave an example, in fact, of the Indian Sundarbans Delta. Such an example, in fact, is also prevalent, more or less, as far as the US West is concerned, because between 1920s and 1960s, which have been described as the dam building decades in the United States, of course, major projects came up in the Western US, including the Central Arizona project, the Hoover Dam, and the best of the constructions happened. In fact, if one recalls, the Damodar Valley Corporation, which was one of the considered to be one of the best multi-purpose projects in the post-British era. Post-British era in the sense, in fact, it was conceived of in the 1940s, around 1943-44, but was completed in 1948. That was modeled with keeping in mind the Tennessee Valley Corporation. Now, in the Western US, what happened was the water was the Colorado waters. They were diverted towards the central Arizona, and eventually there was stream flow depletion. In fact, farther downstream in Mexico, because the Colorado happens to be an international transboundary river. There was salinity ingression, and eventually that destroyed the paddy cultivation in lower Colorado, especially in Mexico. And I talked of the same phenomenon, in fact, of the drying Sundarbans Delta, especially when it comes to the dry season cultivation and dry season paddy that has been completely destroyed. But interestingly, how essentially forms of adaptation take place is that many of these variables, because of large-scale salinity ingression, many of these agricultural fields over the last 15 years have been converted to aquaculture. So what I would like to talk of is how essentially some of these values of ecosystem services. I'm not going to talk of the techniques because it's too short a time to teach techniques. One needs to go through an entire course in ecological economics, which might require more than 1.5 to 2 years. But rather, I would like to sensitize the readers on how the listeners on how essentially you can use these values in the broader policymaking framework, and important decisions can be arrived at, including the decisions on land use change. So, as I stated, that a large body of literature on the valuation of the ecosystem services have emerged over time. And more importantly, because why values are important is values essentially are signals of scarcity of the resource under consideration. So, of course, I am putting across some of the very, very critical rationales on why we put values of these ecosystem services. More importantly, apart from being very, very objective instruments for decision making, they help in legal proceedings to determine damages where a party is held liable for causing harm to another party, be it in the case of upstream pollution, be it in the case of suppose say water diversion. And it can also help in some way or the other in compensation. In the sense, compensation can work in various ways. Compensation can work in the creation of markets on the one hand. Suppose say in the USA, especially as far as the city of New York is concerned, it receives the water from a particular watershed called the Catskill. Now, in and around that watershed, the indigenous communities, they have been protecting that, and they have become the resource managers. So essentially, the corporation or the water managers, in fact, in New York, they have been paying a price to the Catskill watershed protectors, to the indigenous community, for essentially protecting the watershed, for not destroying the watershed, and this helps the process of development as well. So valuation of the service that the watershed has been providing to the downstream community is being recognized, and eventually a payment is also being made. So this is also, in the one sense, creation of a market on the one hand, and helping the process of compensation. And valuation of the ecosystem services becomes important. So more importantly, which something that while advising WWF India, I have often indulged in, we used to do these valuation exercises mostly, in fact, to inform the government as well as the firms to relook at some of the very, very critical infrastructure investment decisions, especially when it comes to linear infrastructure that would have otherwise destroyed the ecosystem and eventually the ecosystem services. So I will just talk about three cases here. One was the case of the Kunigal wetlands. Now, this was essentially approached to us from HSBC, and on what is the value of this wetland. It's not that many people are living there. It's a small wetland, and this wetland is located in Karnataka. Uh, in the Tumkur district, has the lake has a total spread of 416.2 hectare area with a gross storage capacity of 532.2 million cubic feet, mainly fed by the Hemavati river. And if you look at the land use land cover map, it looks somewhat like this. Has fallow land, cropland, built up area, then the water bodies, as well as the scrub forests and open forests and barren land as well. So what we did was, we intended to inform the community, inform the bank on what essentially is the value of this ecosystem service, and how much value is being extracted by the community in and around this wetland uh, from the ecosystem as such. So what is the ecosystem dependency of the community? And based on that, infrastructure decisions can be taken. So the idea was that there was supposed to be some kind of somebody was planning to do construct a rolling mill out there, which would have created major problems for this ecosystem. So we chose only a few ecosystem services, which essentially included water, that is water for agriculture as well as water for domestic use, because water has multidimensional use. We included fisheries, we included fodder, water quality regulation, which is a regulating service of the ecosystem, carbon sequestration, and microclimate regulation, because couldn't choose the entire range of ecosystem services because this was a very short-term study. And what we found was something like this, that the total value of the ecosystem services, including the provisioning and the regulating ones, are around 1030.45 for the year 2015. Let me clarify that. This is for the year 2015. Now, there is a temple in that particular region. And of course, the ecosystem, the wetland by itself has a tourism value, which is not recognized. And we also estimated that through a method called the benefit transfer method. And we found that even if it is not fully optimized, it still has that small wetland can still recognize a value of 159.37 or 137.36 million INR annually. What I devised at that point in time was a particular index called the ecosystem dependency ratio of the community. It is the ratio of the direct use values in the form of some of the important provisioning and regulating services and the income of the community. And what we found was that the values of the ecosystem services, or the values that the community is extracting from the ecosystem services, are 24% higher than the income of the community. That means that the livelihoods, that beyond the livelihoods provided by the ecosystem, the wetland, by the economy as such, not the ecosystem, the wetlands actually provide a higher value than the average incomes of the household. So this creates a clear case for conservation. So if suppose I completely destroy or obliterate this ecosystem from the face of this earth, I have to compensate them with at least 124% more than what they're earning right now. which apparently creates a case that the ecosystem needs to be conserved for development, for livelihoods of the community, while we talk about developing the community, the means of income of the community from alternate sources. So the second case that I'd like to talk of is, of course, of a much broader ecosystem that is at a landscape level, the Terai Art landscape in Uttarakhand, where we also covered essentially the Terai Art landscape, of course, is spread across Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, and some parts of Bihar, but we essentially covered Uttarakhand, where quite a bit of urbanization has been taking place over time. So this Uttarakhand region of the Tal or the Terayat landscape, that has an area to the extent of 18,496 square kilometer and spread across 7 districts. So these 7 districts essentially are Dehradun, Hardwar, Garhwal, Almora, Nainital, Champawat. By Garhwal, of course, I mean both the Garhwals are there, including the Tehri Garhwal, Nainital, Udham Singh Nagar, and Champawat. So here also we chose a few ecosystem services. It was not possible to take all of them, but more than what we did, in fact, in the Kunigal case, we had water for agriculture, water for hydropower, carbon sequestration, drinking water, tourism, microclimate regulation, fuel wood, fodder, and religious tourism. Now, if you look at something interesting that we were doing here, that we were not taking any of these supporting services. This is more so because the supporting services are some kind of an umbrella service. And had we added that, because they are supporting all the services, and had we added that, there will be clear cut double counting, which will inflate the figures of the values of ecosystem services unnecessarily. So we wanted to have conservative estimates and show that these are already very high, and eventually there is a clear case of conservation for the sake of the human community. So the message that we intended to bear in each of these cases is that it is conservation for development. So not conservation is not against development. So what we did here was we estimated this is initially for the 2005-6. Then in fact, we estimated these values for 2010-11. Then we estimated these for 2015-16. So in 2005-6, the values of this 9 ecosystem services were 227.52 billion Indian rupees. In 2015-16, these values were 390 billion Indian rupees. In 15-16, and in 2011-12, it was less than that, 344. In other words, in fact, in dollar terms, it was $6 billion in 2015-16. The interesting fact is that this ecosystem dependency ratio was 1.19, in fact, in 2005-6. But over time, what we found was that the ecosystem dependency ratio is declining. This is more so because the incomes from the other sources, that is essentially from the service sectors, they have been increasing. The ecosystem, especially people have been, there has been repatriation of income from outside the region. So this led to an ecosystem dependency ratio, which has declined from 1.19 in 2005-6 to 0.41. And large-scale urbanization is also taking place. But even then, one needs to note that 40% of the ecosystem services were made up from 40% of the total income were essentially made up by the ecosystem services, which is quite a huge number. Let me come to the third case. This is, of course, a completely different case on how we essentially used these values of ecosystem services from the perspective of essentially thinking of adaptation or managed and strategic retreat as adaptation for climate change. This is for the Indian Sundarbans Delta. Now, WWF India, I already told you small bits about how, what is happening, unfolding, in fact, in the Indian Sundarbans, that the delta is shrinking on the one hand, we are losing out on the land. And more importantly, many of you must have heard of the Umphun or the Amphan, which have affected the local community and devastated the delta to a large extent. And more importantly, the propensity of the severe events, extreme events, has been increasing over time. So now in 2011, WWF India, especially with Dr. Anurag Danda and Professor Jayanto Bandyopadhyay and Shugato Hajra and others, they conceived of this particular vision that people have to be moved out of this particular region, but it has to be a phased and a managed and strategic retreat, because these are the regions where over time, over the next 40 or 50 years, this region might not exist on the face of this earth. You cannot make people stay. People won't be in a position to stay there. So the Vision 2050 of the Indian Sundarbans Delta talked of movement of population from vulnerable regions to safer regions in other parts of West Bengal, which has also been identified later on. And they talked about demarcating areas within the biodiversity district by the green line, which has been given in this map, where development is unsustainable, and ecological restoration. By ecological restoration, they talked about organic restoration. Keep it as it is. The mangrove forests are going to regenerate themselves. And restrict land transfer within the green line. Uh, and of course, provide economic opportunities to the people who are going to move out, provide them with the opportunities, create the forces of development in regions where these guys are going to move out, so that there's a pull factor out there for better economic opportunities. And as the population migrates to the newly developed areas due to enhanced opportunities, these vacated areas are to be restored to mangrove forests, and future investments should focus on ecosystem restoration. Now, what might be the enhanced ecosystem services in the process when this ecosystem restoration takes place? So it was in 2012 that they approached me, that when I was in fact working in the financial sector, that why don't you conduct a complete economic assessment of this plan? So what we found was, if we keep that area vacate and people move out by 2050 at all, hypothetical scenario, of course, then what might be the added ecosystem services that are going to be generated? This, we found that this may be in the form of carbon sequestration, fishery production, storm surge protection, tourism, honey, prawn larva, crab, etc., and so on and so forth. But the current, what are the, if suppose the community stays there and the business as usual continues, what happens to the expected benefits between 2050 and 2100? And we found that it's to the tune of 172,306.27 billion INR. And in the scenario when essentially this relocation has happened, where we also have added ecosystem services, we have essentially the income generated out of service sector employment, where because new forces of development have been created in the safer region, there are total incomes generated out of skilled employment, there are total flow of benefits. What is the total flow of benefits happening? That is the sum of these. Now, when we do this process, conduct this entire process, there are costs to be incurred. The cost of regeneration, there will be loss of incomes from the business as usual scenario, cost of residential construction, establishing hospitals, schools, training institutes, so on and so forth. So what we found was that in the Vision 2050 scenario, that essentially yields 13 times, almost 13 times, 12.86 times more net benefits, that is benefit minus the cost, than the business as usual scenario, which creates a clear case, at least economically, a clear case of the managed and strategic retreat of the population from the vulnerable regions to the safer regions. Now, this is, of course, a phenomenon that has been happening globally. It's not that anything has been thought of, anything completely, something that happens to be a complete global aberration has been thought of. This has been happening, in fact, in Chile, in the United States of America, in many other places. And a host of research has been going on strategic and managed retreat. However, let's concentrate on this ecosystems and the poverty. Essentially, why did we call it the GDP of the poor? We already discussed that in terms of the ecosystem dependency index. But the term was first used by a colleague, by a senior colleague of mine, Pawan Sukhdev, who presently happens to be the president of WWF International. And so this was in fact in a paper published in Nature that he used this term, and he showed how in India 57% because of the of the GDP of the poor essentially is emerging from the ecosystem services. But as far as the total GDP is concerned, the provisioning services which are being marketed, they essentially take up barely 7% of the total GDP. So the problem is that the standard GDP definition, that is the standard definitions of development or growth, they are not able to accommodate the loss in the ecosystem services. So when we are thinking about a project as such, a bigger project which entails either climate adaptation or a linear infrastructure kind of a project, we need to look at what are the losses that are going to happen or the benefits that are going to be accrued in the form of the ecosystem services. And this needs to be plugged into the entire equation of the cost benefit analysis. And that becomes important when you really think about green GDP or green accounting. In fact, this the recent EIA, the draft EIA 2020, it also alludes of it. Doesn't really get into great depth, but alludes of it. If I mean, you recall the 2019 election manifestos of at least two parties, the Congress and the BJP. The Congress manifesto talked about a green budget. The BJP manifesto talked about a separate payment, rather a green bonus to the Himalayan states. Both these principles have to be based on the valuation of the ecosystem services. More so because these acknowledge the roles of the ecosystem services or the roles of the ecosystem or the natural resources in the broader development canvas of the nation. So, importantly, Sukhdev argued that with the poor being highly dependent on the ecosystem services, they are the ones who are also going to be the ones mostly hit with the depletion and degradation of the natural resource base. So that becomes a cost, because when you hit their one of the sources of their livelihoods, in the process, what you are also encouraging or what you are also brewing in the system is some form of social conflict. Social conflict is a social cost. And that social cost has to come in the entire cost benefit metrics of the project that we are conceiving of. So that is essentially the idea. But in the process, there are other developmental implications as well of these ecosystem services. First of all, they help in understanding the trade-offs between conservation and development. They help rationalize finance for development and gives the option for development financial institutions. Should we get into this project? Should World Bank at all fund a project on highways or roads, or shouldn't they? More importantly, this brings in the very, very critical, it's not only from the concern of sustainability as such. Of course, sustainability concerns are very, very prominent here, but also the concern of equity in entire development policy thinking, because we are bringing in the argument of GDP of the poor in the context of by bringing in valuation of ecosystem services. So, and one very critical element which I talked of is development of institutions like markets. When I talked about the Catskill watershed case, that has been the most celebrated case of payment for ecosystem services, or pays, rather, because these pays schemes have been tried out in various parts in various nations, but a host of experiments have actually yielded mixed results. In most cases, there have been failures. There have been some cases of success. And of course, these enabling conditions for success happens to be, first of all, the identification of whether the ecosystem service is marketable or not. And what is the entire, the service value chain? Can we really identify the final consumer as also, in fact, the final manager or the producer? Because the producer happens to be nature, but who is the manager of it? And eventually the identification of the beneficiaries and upstream ecosystem managers. These are very, very critical. But valuation happens to be fundamental a very, very fundamental tenet, a fundamental cornerstone in development of these kinds of institutions. And with that, I'd like to stop here. I think I've talked a lot. Maybe, in fact, one or two questions can be taken up.
Sir, thank you very much, sir. Sir, thank you very much, sir, for
Thank you.
giving your valuable time for our participants and also for our organizers and our complete team, sir. Your talk was very excellent, and it is a new dimension for us to know about. Actually, we all are ecologists or biologists, broadly speaking. But as being a economist, you have given a very new dimension to our knowledge, sir. It was a very, very great session to have you here, sir. Now, let us go for the next question and answer hour.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, can you stop the screen sharing?
Just a minute.
Yes.
Why can't he see the entire screen? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Resume. Okay. Pause share. Has it stopped?
No, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, one question, sir. Can local government can take steps preserve and not to allow to create residential areas through this increased inflow of water into urban lakes?
Repeat, please. Sorry, I just missed out something.
Yeah, yes, sir. Can local government take steps preserve and not to allow to create residential areas through this increased inflow of water to urban lakes?
Increased inflow of water to urban areas.
Urban lakes, sir. Urban lakes.
Oh, from lakes to other areas. That's what you are saying. Is it like that? That from lakes to the urban areas, whether the local government can take a position?
One second, sir.
It's not like that, sir. Yeah.
Inflow of water into urban lakes, sir.
Oh, inflow of water to urban lakes from
Yes,
these lakes
Yes.
to urban lakes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Well, I simply don't know the jurisdictions under which, in fact, which lakes will fall. See, as far as I can talk about this is East Kolkata wetlands. This is one of the. It happens to be right now not under the jurisdiction of the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, despite the fact that it goes beyond the KMC area. Now, what has happened over time is that the lake, this wetland, has largely been destroyed, and it is now providing as some kind of a drainage facility or a sanitation facility. It on the other hand, if essentially had it been under the jurisdiction of a separate municipality, then possibly there would have been, they could have stopped this kind of whatever, whether it's in the form of water or in the form of acting as a sewerage canal or whatever it is, they could have stopped that. But it depends solely on the jurisdiction, whether it's falling under one municipal corporation or one municipality or some other municipality, because we definitely recognize the third layer of the government out here.
Yes, sir. So one more question, sir. What are the mechanisms an ecologist can use to prevent ecological imbalance caused by floods, forest fires, and drought?
Floods, forest fires, and drought.
Yes, sir.
See, this is purely these have mostly the ecological solutions rather than an economic solution. But economic instruments. Now, forest fires are mostly need not always be caused by those are natural phenomenon. Floods are natural phenomenon. But the fact remains that why are floods becoming disasters? This is an important concern. When we talk about floods, say as far as the floods over the river Koshi or the floods on the Brahmaputra, I mean, they have been happening from time immemorial. And more importantly, they have very, very important ecosystem services, because it's this flood waters which also used to bring in sediments. And when this flood waters essentially used to recede, rich fertile sediments, rich alluvium were essentially left back on the soil, and they used to enrich the soil fertility. And that has created, while essentially the Gangetic Plain is known as the rice bowl of South Asia, is precisely because of floods. Now the problem is why essentially the floods became disasters. That is because of when the British engineers, British technocrats brought about their colonial engineering thinking in India, they simply didn't understand the nature of the Himalayan rivers. They didn't, as far as European engineering is concerned, or British rivers, European rivers are concerned, if you look at the hydrographs are almost like horizontal lines. That is, suppose how much precipitation or how much flow is happening during the month of January, or suppose you look at how much flow is happening in the month of July, they are almost the same. But when it comes to India, or suppose a South Asia as such, we have a phenomenon called southwest monsoon. And eventually the graph moves like this, and it's like a bell-shaped curve or a normal distribution curve. So it increases during the month of June, July, and then again recedes during the month of October, November. So floods were actually very natural phenomenon. And prior to the 17th century or the 18th century, all these regions, they lived with the floods. They enjoyed the floods. They enjoyed the benefits brought about by the floods. But when the British engineers came, they started creating embankments. And these embankments got automatically breached over time. That increased the flood damages over time. The same phenomenon is happening as far as the Brahmaputra is concerned. It is not that the rivers are essentially causing damages. We have come on the weirs of the rivers. So one very critical element is that the metabolic rift that reductionist engineering and reductionist economics have caused to between man and nature. Can we reverse that? Probably it's going to be a very, very difficult phenomenon, but we have to be ecologically much more sensitive. So now that the Farakka barrage is already there, it's constructed, there are a number of problems faced by the delta. But interesting, it has not even resolved the problem of the Kolkata port, because minimum trade is happening through the Kolkata port. Navigability has not improved. But the fact remains that this barrage, because of water diversion through the Hooghly Channel, has resolved the water problem of non-tidal parts of West Bengal, including Kolkata. Kolkata is a water secure city, precisely because of that. So now how do we balance this? This is a concern. Whether is economics going to solve the problem, or ecology is going to solve the problem? These are, very, very normative concerns that we have in mind.
Yes, sir. One more question, sir. China being manufacturing hub must be somehow doing with the ecological service. Please comment on their strategy.
Sorry, and just repeat it once more.
China being manufacturing hub must be somehow doing with the ecological services. Please comment on their strategy.
I don't know how. First of all, ecosystem service is a natural phenomenon. It cannot be constructed. But there is something interesting that China did with the sediments at one point in time. See, they also, as far as the Yellow River is concerned, they have a Yellow River Commission. Yellow River, you should keep in mind, has the highest suspended sediment load. The highest sediment happens to be, in fact, the most sediment-laden river happens to be the Brahmaputra, Yarlung Sangpa Brahmaputra Jamuna Stretch. But the highest sediment load essentially is the one happens to be there in the Yellow River. And sedimentation over the Yellow River after the construction of Three Gorges and a host of other constructions, that has been a major problem. So they also started understanding the importance of sediments. So they had a very interesting sediment separation techniques. What they did was they essentially started using the high flows to flush out the sediments that were there, in fact, getting deposited on the barrages or the dams itself, and eventually helping the process, creating channels and helping them, in fact, to get them deposited further downstream. So this helped the cause of the sediment deposition to a certain extent, but that has not really resolved the entire environmental degradation or the ecosystem degradation that the dam has created. And forget the fact that there are already major furrows all across with the Three Gorges and other constructions, precisely because of rehabilitation issues. That always remains there.
Yes, sir. So one more question, sir. What are the advantages of the ecosystem valuation in development policy?
In development policy?
Policy, yes.
Yes, I talked about that. In fact, see, one important thing is that it helps us identifying the role of the ecosystem when I'm putting in this value. Okay, and say when I put across this argument of GDP of the poor, I find that a high percentage of the GDP of the poor is being provided by the ecosystem services. So if I ignore this value and think about that, okay, fine, let me obliterate the forest in the name of creating a shopping mall or a highway or a huge resort, and okay, maybe these communities are going to get employment in the process. But are these, first of all, I'm simply oblivious of the fact that whether this community is at all equipped to work in that resort or not. Do they have the skill set? Probably they have the primary skill set at this point in time. They can do fishing, and they can survive on the food and the fodder and whatever that is provided by the forest. Until and unless I really equip the community, I really know the value that the ecosystem is providing them in addition to the formal income, maybe from fisheries and other things, or maybe working, in fact, in some other place as household help or whatever it is, I won't be able to realize the entire development paradigm, the equity aspect of development. Because development is not only about growth, development is also about equity, about distribution. So I'm only looking at the growth. Total incomes are growing. But is it that the incomes or the well-being, are they getting percolated to the poor? Are they getting percolated to the various stratum of the society? Are they getting percolated to the various strata of the society? That is the question. So once I bring in the ecosystem dimension here, I will be able to look at the equity dimension of development on the one hand and sustainability of development on the other hand. Is the development sustainable if I completely obliterate all resources, completely move away from the conservation goals? Is this development sustainable at all? No, because my development is also contingent upon natural capital. Until unless there is natural capital, where should the fundamental base of capital come from? And the natural capital is completely gone. So naturally, my development is not going to be sustainable. Therefore, the value of the natural capital needs to be captured through the value of the ecosystem services, the services provided by the natural capital. That is why I said natural capital is the stock, the service is the flow. So I'm valuing the stock on the basis of this flow. That is essentially the idea here. And that gives me the idea on how essentially development can become equitable, development can become sustainable.
Yes, sir, you are right. Because we are worried about land, labor, and capital always, and going for the development. We never worried about sustainable development.
Yes.
Basically, every time we concentrate about more of concentration on like acquisition of the land and the policies and everything, and about the labor, how we and where we get the capital and everything from. Concerned about that. We're coming to development also, and growth we are concerned both, but never government. We can't say about government is taking initiatives and everything. But in generally, sustainable development is not existing actually. In the developed countries also, they're worried about industrialization and everything, sir. But very insightful, sir. One more question, sir. Someone is K. Abraham. Can you unmute your mic and you can ask the question? Dr. K. Abraham. Irva, sir.
Karthik, two more are there. You ask them to interact.
Yeah, that's what I am asking. Okay. Yeah, Niranjan sir, you can unmute your mic and you can ask the question, sir. Niranjan sir. Niranjan sir. Yeah, thank you, sir. I think they are into some other issues, and thank you so much. Economical, how you explained everything is clearly. So thank you so much about everything. Because I'm also like I'm very much interested in economics actually. So when I'm reading about all these economics and how it will be interrelated to like because these three things starts with like land, labor, and capital. How we can relate to polity or so every subject is related to these three things only. Geographically or art and culture or scientifically, everything comes with this only. The way you explained about related to ecology and everything, very insightful, and thank you so much, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for
Nageshwar
inviting
sir.
me.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Nageshwar sir and Vijay Bhaskar, can you reflect? Can you give your views on the session, sir?
Yeah.
Nageshwar sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a very beautiful lecture in this after today evening, sir. Yeah, we actually as a part of course we have arranged different lectures in which ecological economics also one of the part. Yeah, as a part of this course, there are so many teachers, faculty, assistant professor, faculty, and there are so many scholars have joined from different parts of the states. Definitely, I hope this will. I will introduce I will give you your details, sir. I'll share your link to all the participants. So whenever they find a question or any limitation, or they want to have a discussion with you or any of the WWF member, please try to give some suggestions for them to develop their ecosystem in their own institutions or industry, wherever they work, sir. So with that request, I thank you very much once again for your readily accepting our invitation with just mail. We hope our this kind of collaboration will continue in future also, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Just a small announcement. If somebody intends to look at this, there's a paper, in fact, in the ORF website, GDP of the poor. So, so if somebody wants a reference material for this lecture, that paper can pretty well be the reference material for this. Though there, in fact, a lot of materials are there, in fact, also in the WWF website. But that paper essentially summarizes the thought, whatever I stated today, to a large extent. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll share the links, sir. I'll share the links with all the participants. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Madam, will you respond? Yeah, one second. Madam.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Actually, as Nageshwar sir rightly said that we have different participants, sir, from students to faculty members. The students who not yet decided their destiny, this can be the potential area to dig and to explore, because I think all these days you might not be knowing this area, how to handle and how to do all these things. You can take this as one of the potential area to explore, and you can choose this as one of your career also. Sir, you have given very, very great information, sir. With this, all our participants will definitely enlighten, and definitely they can take this as one of their professions, sir. Thank you very, very much, sir, for being with us in this evening session, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, ma'am.
Do you have any instructions for the participant, sir? Nageshwar sir and Vijay Bhaskar Reddy sir. Are there any instructions to the participants, sir?
Madam, there are no any special instructions. We will be sharing our feedback and attendance sheet very shortly within half an hour. So please fill the complete attendance and feedback session and send back immediately. That is one. And second one is already we have shared Google form with all the participants for about your contact information. So tomorrow will be the last day, so that we those we have sent, it is okay, but those we are pending with the contact information, please send immediately, so that we will include all the contact information in one Excel file and one zip, or else an Excel sheet or in zip file. We will share with all of you participants. Those who are interested only can share. If somebody is not interested to join, also no issue. You cannot fill and send the form, but attendance is mandatory. Please send the attendance and feedback from today and tomorrow. Also be on time and be in good number, because tomorrow will be the last day. And especially those who have attended all these sessions, I'm telling since beginning of the course, those who have attended all these sessions and sent all the feedback forms will get the certificate. Those who have not sent the feedback form and attendance sheet and skipped the sessions will not be given any certificate. I am sorry to say this, because number is coming down, and anyway tomorrow is the last day, and we have got our own instructions of certain formalities from the UGC and Usmania University. We have some instructions to us, so that we were following those guidelines. So until unless you attend the complete course, complete sessions, even if you are not there in the Zoom, and if you send the feedback term, we are not going to give certificate. So that is also, we will ensure that. So please come in time, and please listen all the classes tomorrow also till end of the complete course. And tomorrow evening we have a valedictory session. After valedictory session, we will be giving the feedback form, so that be in tune, so that you can complete your responsibility from your end, so that we will provide your certificate without any delay. Thank you, madam.
Thank you very much, sir, for the instructions.
Thank you, sir.
Madam
Yes.
would like to share something.
Yes, sir. Sorry, all the participants, because we should be very strict to this. As sir rightly said, that we got strong instructions from our higher officials saying that whoever are not attending regularly, they cannot be given any certificate. So please ensure that you fill all the feedback forms from at least now onwards to all the sessions, so that you will be given certificate within short duration. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, one more thing, madam. Anybody would like to give their feedback during the valedictory, please give their name early, so that there won't be any time delay. Yeah, you can have interact session at valedictory. Each one given only two minutes time. Within that, you give your feedback. Thank you.
Yes, madam.
Thank you,
Yes, yeah. One Karthik. Yes, sir said. Tomorrow you prepare for yourself thing, and you will be given 2 minutes time. We are expecting very good number of participants to give a valedictory session. There will be a valedictory in the slot for the response of the participants. So we will give ample time for the good number of the participants, but each one will get a 2 minutes time, and there will be a 15-20 minutes time for the responses of all the participants. And so you raise your hand tomorrow morning, or else you can make a chart, so that Karthik and Srijan will note down, and we'll invite you into the panel list, and you can speak during the valedictory session. That is one instruction. And secondly, those who are interested, the teachers, the lecturers, the faculty of autonomous colleges, or even government colleges, private colleges, or any industry person, any research scholar, or anybody is associated with the educational institutions, consultancies, we request you, please share your details, so that we will have one more detailed discussion, a brainstorming workshop kind of thing, and we will be ready to assist you in your college or in your institution. From our side, Dr. Vijay Bhaskar Reddy is a good taxonomist with vast experience. He can identify all kinds of flora in your college or even your institution, and identify and give a detailed report on the plant related information. And myself, I am from the zoology department. I will help you to identify different kinds of animals, or different kinds of insects or fauna which is available at your institution. And madam also is ready with the wastewater treatment and water percolation kind of thing, or water harvesting and vermicomposting and other water and air pollution related issues, so that we will come together with you to your college or to your institution. We will try to help you, and we will ready to share our information and knowledge, all the data available with us to have a green audit at your institution, so that make use of our efforts or our expertise in your institution. And if you are able, if anybody is having in the panel, in the attendees, anybody is having good information, you also share with us, so that in your institution internal audit can be done, and from our side we are ready to come as an external, and so that your complete green auditing can be evaluated at your institution, so that we will make some effort and we will make a platform out of this 6 days course, so that will be useful to you and useful to the entire this green audit community in future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very, very much, sir, for giving this last instruction to all the participants. Yes, sir, as we discussed earlier, it will be better to have such interaction with the participants, with their institutions, sir. Thank you very much. We will look forward to have such interaction from the participants, sir. Okay, thank you, sir. I think now we can end the session.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Vijay Bhaskar sir and Nageshwar sir.
Yes, madam. Please.
Yes, madam.
We'll
We'll be sharing the feedback and attendance status very shortly.
In the short time in the WhatsApp group, sir.
Yes, WhatsApp.
Bye, sir. Bye, ma'am.
Okay, sir.
Bye.
Bye, Karthik. Bye.